Um, so if your model looks like this, you need to modify your lighting. So the first thing you want is the skylight to be on. So once the skylight is on, right now I'm getting more of a consistent illumination of all sides of the model. So there's no light or shadow. It's just consistently illuminating all of the edges and surfaces. So you get shade, kind of a shaded view in a way. So if I turn this off, okay, so you see the difference between the two. 360 environment, custom environment for skylighting. So the custom environment for skylighting, you also want that on because it's using the lighting settings based off the studio environment. So if there's no environment, right, there's absolutely nothing happening. There's no lighting. It's just color. And that's not really great. It's not great to look at. And also when you render it, it's going to look really dark. So if you don't have that, if it's at no environment, you want to make sure your studio is on, and that's a default option. It should be a default, but you can also add it in basic environment. And then you can go in and modify here. Let's see. But I would just use the default. Okay, now there's some brightness. But the default one, the studio one, they've already worked out the settings, so I would just use, it should be there, studio. So you want to have those two on. The other one is sun. So right now you're seeing a lot of illumination. You're not seeing my shadows because my ground plane isn't on. So the sun, again, is going to give you those, the shadows, the directional light. It's going to give you more contrast between surfaces and objects, if there's more objects. So you really want to have both of these on. So with the ground plane here, so you can see again, my ground, there's a distinction between the ground and the sky right now because I've added a material onto the ground plane. So if you just select, click on the ground plane setting, you can apply a material just like any other surface in Rhino. So here I just, used a new material, a custom material. So I'll run through that. Okay, use new custom material. Why is it not wanting to? Okay. Anyway, so you want to go to new custom material. And here you can set the color you want. So I can change it to a lighter shade, a darker shade. I can then add reflection, right? So the default doesn't have any reflection, but now if I turn the reflectivity up, you're seeing that reflection on the ground there. Okay, so already that's looking a bit more dynamic, a bit more interesting, but again, this is just a preview. You can also see my bump maps that I've applied, right? But again, the lighting isn't great right now. So now, let me just run through 360. Okay, so now we can get into ray trace. So I've set up my environment, right? I've applied a ground plane, a texture to my ground plane so I can have reflection. And again, you want you need to have that checked. Well, sorry, you don't need to have that checked. This option, the use custom environment for reflections, is going to incorporate the studio lighting onto the surface of the ground plane. And so we can look at what that looks like once we render it out. But if you want reflections in your ground plane, you need to add the material to the ground. I think that gets a bit more interesting. Okay, so in rendered view, you're going to set up your environment. You're going to get ready for rendering. And so once you get to a point where you want to start checking colors and the materials, then you can start to render it out. So you can use the Rhino render that's down here, or what my preferred method is to use ray trace. So I'm going to turn that on, and you can see here it's preparing it, and there you go. So you see how it's kind of fuzzy. So it's rendering the view in real time right now. But you can see that the lighting quality changed, the colors changed. Remember that white box from the studio environment? That's not as noticeable anymore. You can still see a line, but it's applying the lighting onto that surface because it's rendering it. But you see as I'm rotating it, it's literally rendering it out. So the longer, if I don't move my mouse, and I just wait, it's going to get, there's the samples are, it's essentially rendering the view so that it gets more clear. So now you're seeing less of the pixelation, and you see down here, this is the number of passes that it has gone over. So it's gone through 90 times. Now we're at 100. So because I haven't moved it, it's getting more and more clear, the view. And I can also tell it how many times I want it to render this scene or my environment. So I put 1,000. So that sounds like a lot, but it's doing it really quickly. So I'm at 152, and it's only been going for a minute, which is not a lot of time. Yeah, so what you don't want to necessarily be working in ray trace because it uses more of your computer's hardware, right? Because it's actually rendering it. But you want to use this to start checking. So once you've set up everything in rendered view, you would come into ray trace so that you can check the quality of the materials, the quality of the bump map, the quality of the lighting. Because obviously, as you saw, it drastically changed between the two settings. But it can slow your computer down and make it more difficult to work. So it also depends on the operating system of your computer. So, and also the complexity of your project. So the more objects there are, the more complex surfaces and materials there are, it's going to take longer to render. So it's more for checking quickly, and then rendering it than for really doing a lot of work in. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. But now you can see it's been 2 minutes, and it's fairly clear. There's not a lot of pixelation on the image. I could probably, so you can see like if it's starting to move faster, the samples, that means it's basically rendered it almost fully. So I could probably stop it about now and it would be okay. So I'm going to say 600. So it will stop at 600, and it's going really fast right now, so it's basically done rendering. I probably could have stopped it at 500. And once it gets to 600, it will stop. Great. So that means I can save it out. So you're going to use the same method of capture, viewport capture to file. So here is where things can not necessarily go wrong, but if you aren't aware of your settings, then what will happen is it will render again. So let's say this is the view, this is the view you want. You want to make sure, and you want to save this view, and you don't want it to render again. Okay, so you set your resolution to viewport, which is, you can see here, 1287 by 669 pixels, which is okay for